You're listening to Sisters Let's Talk on ABC Radio Australia.
You've met Shamima Ali here on Sisters Let's Talk before. She runs the Fiji Women's Crisis Center and is the chair of the Pacific Women's Network Against Violence Against Women. In that role, she helped to develop a set of principles that are being used to train influential men from organizations like the police service and the military to be leaders in gender-based violence prevention.
Wherever we have violence against women and girls, the driving force is patriarchy, and all the gender inequalities, discrimination that women suffer comes along with that. And then in Fiji and in the Pacific, it's further exacerbated by deeply held beliefs around culture, religion, and other things like now we have climate change, the increased use of drugs.
Tell me about the principles that were developed to include men in the conversation about gender-based violence.
The only thing that we are guided by in the Pacific right now in working with men are what we call the Warwick Principles, which is a document that came out of regional organizations, crisis centers, and so on, women's organizations, and the men who either of their own volition have started work on men's programs or who are working alongside women, women's groups, and so on, who gathered together. And I think, Papua New Guinea, Vanuatu, Solomon Islands, Samoa, Tonga, and other countries around the Pacific were all present there. Then we looked at all the various, and it was a partnership between the Fiji Women's Crisis Center and UN Women and the Pacific Women's Network. So in partnership, we looked at all the programs that were, and we looked at what are global best practice and what has worked in Fiji. And so the men and the women who were there agreed to certain principles that if we are going to work with men and boys, which is very, very vital in this work, in prevention work on violence against women and girls, that these are the principles that we must adhere to, and these are the principles that we have adhered to with the Male Advocacy for Women's Human Rights Program that was developed by the Pacific Women's Network Against Violence Against Women.
What are the principles outlined in the document?
The first one is being accountable to the women's movement in the Pacific. All programs must be based on women's experiences of violence, discrimination, inequality, and so on. And that women must lead the work on ending violence against women and girls. Men must work with women to be able to do this and following the principles and of how we do this work. The second one, doing no harm. And, while we have men's programs, while it's very vital to prevention work, it also has its risks. The basic principle is doing no further harm because these women and girls have already been harmed. So being grounded in a human rights-based approach, that means any work that we do must be rights-based. Another one is being evidence-based and continue building evidence. So research, data collection is very, very important, that our work is based on evidence and not hearsay and knee-jerk reactions and so on. Being inclusive and intersectional, which is bringing in everybody, people with disabilities, the LGBT plus community, what we call the minorities, and so on, people who are often ignored, that it is inclusive of that because violence also spread. No one is immune to violence. Being gender transformative, questioning gender power relations, and so on. That's another principle. And looking at the power relations, looking at patriarchy and the gender norms and so on. And being informed by context is the last principle. And that one is about our cultural context, the context of each country. Though patriarchy is everywhere, so solutions must come within the context of that country.
How do you apply the principles?
Ours is called Male Advocacy for Women's Human Rights. And because when men started questioning us while we were doing this work, it was Vanuatu, Fiji, Solomon Islands, Papua New Guinea, some men would say that I don't beat my wife, I don't rape women, but this work looks good. We want to be part of this. Why don't you make men? So that is a good thing because they themselves want to come in, And so we said, how we teach the women, we'll teach them. And, sometimes also people say, men will only listen to men. We say the first stage of the training is by women who have worked in this area, who have got a proven track record, that you start listening to us here. And then it has worked. And then the second one is masculinities, and that can be carried out by men well trained in masculinities. Then there's another third stage. Out of that, we've got out a handbook, which has a job description for a male advocate and so on. And, basically male advocates have to change themselves first, look at their own behavior. So the first week of training is about a lot of introspection, change their thinking around women, patriarchal thoughts and so on, believe that women are their equals, equal as human beings, and so on, respect for women and so on. Then they influence change in other men, in their sphere of influence. Like, for example, the people that we pick out for the first trainings are people from the religious. The religious leader, very important in our context. The traditional leaders, very important. Youth leaders, policy makers, police, very important in this work. And also we've had military people who have influence, people who have power, so that they change their own behavior, then influence other men. But they also help out in organizing workshops, inviting women's groups, supporting funding for women's groups, not taking all the funding for themselves from the women's groups and so on. It's hard, but it has worked in Fiji. We have some of the best male advocates, and people who come from other countries, they are amazed at what we have done here. When we were going to Papua New Guinea, people said, you're going to get chased out of there. And we have done many of them in Papua New Guinea. Many male advocates are there, and the women are also working with men.
Shamima, where are these training programs being run?
Some of the countries from the Pacific Women's Network, they are doing it themselves. They have got their own trainers that have been trained by us, and leaders like Merle Tahi in Vanuatu and others in Papua New Guinea, Lorio Sisolo in Solomon Islands and so on. So there are women leaders that have come up because the network was formed in 1992. From then till now, this network is still alive and working, and new people have come in. So these trainings are done in country on request, or we run a 4-week training program in Fiji. It's called the Regional Training Program on Violence Against Women, Human Rights and Gender. So, so that is for all Pacific people. They find their own sponsorship and come. It's a whole array of things, very interactive, sharing experiences and so on. But then there's also a male advocacy program, trainings that we do in our communities in each country. We do a national, then we go provincial, then we go villages. And now, definitely in Solomons, in Vanuatu. Vanuatu is very well ahead in this. We've got committees against violence against women. So when we enter a community, we get together people, first the women, always first the women, 5-day training on all of this. And then understanding the dynamics, the experiences, the law, what does the law say, policing, and things like that. Then the men, about 3, 4, 6 months later, we do the men. Then we bring them together. They pick their own leaders, and then we have the committees against violence against women in these communities. So they become then the advocates there.
And how successful have these initiatives been in getting men to speak out against violence?
If they do the right thing, if they've been trained the right way, they have been very, very powerful. And, a lot of them don't go and, beat the drums and say, I'm a male advocate. They quietly do their work. And women do tell us they feel safer when these men are around. On the whole, most of the men have proven very, very helpful, whether they were in the police force, whether they are in the probations department in social welfare, or whether they are in the judiciary. So these are the kind of men that we have, the people who are, like, for example, I'll give you an example during COVID. When we had domestic violence situations, we had the borders that you could not cross the border. So it happened on the other side of the border. We had traditional leaders or the men of that area bringing down a mother and a daughter who had been raped and no one would help them, brought them down to the, on horseback down to the border. So then we could pick them up from there, put them in isolation, get them the treatment and the justice that they needed and so on. And also reporting domestic violence. One traditional leader would take the hailer every morning and, when in the village head, goes around telling people what they have to do the whole day. Then he'll pass messages of non-violence, don't beat up your wife, and, don't commit domestic violence and all that. So, so those things, then we got reports back of that. So, so little, And then, when you go and do focus group discussions, talk to the children, and the children would say, Mom and Dad don't fight anymore. Mom's not angry every day. Dad spends time with us. That's a big thing, in our traditional communities. And the woman says, nowadays, he has changed a lot. He brings the wood in, he brings the water in, he spends time with the children. Then he goes to drink kava, and the man says, oh, I'm more relaxed with my children. I'm getting to know my children. My wife is not screaming at me that I didn't do this and that, and things like that. So to celebrate those little gains, and then they, and build on those. So, and that's how we work.
What do you think it's going to take to bring an end to these high rates of violence against women and children?
I think that we all need to speak about these things. We are talking about an ocean of peace in the Pacific. How can we have an ocean of peace when our women are suffering in this manner? And then we condone these men and we blame the women for it. So we have all to come together, and we have to change the mindset of men and of women also, women leaders also. So we have to, of society, and we have to speak from the same page. It has to be rights-based. And we also have to look at our faiths and really look at it rather than pick out the misogynistic bits and quote that out of context, because in the Pacific, that is a problem. When we look at our culture, we really have to have a hard look at it. What culture are we talking about? Pre-colonial or post-colonial culture? And most of the time it's post-colonial, because we were colonized by very patriarchal societies. People, the colonizers, and so on. Listen to the women. We have a very strong movement on ending violence against women and girls in the Pacific.